It's Adam from Loose Pixel, and welcome back. Now today, I'd like to offer you some practical advice. And the reason being is, us as artists can very often have a hard time getting into the creative spirit, to get the artistic ball rolling. But just as importantly, it can be difficult maintaining that. There's so many things that can distract us from our art or pull us out of that creative headspace. So I want to offer you some tips and tricks that I've learned in my 45 years on this planet, because I am not foreign to the concept of distraction. I love video games. I have 3 kids. I love surfing the net as much as everybody else does. I'm just as susceptible to distraction as the next person. But I am in a position as a professional, as a YouTuber, as a teacher, that I have to be able to manage that. So I'll give you some tips, and they're things that you might not even realize you do. Some you might not. So I kind of created a bit of a short list here. I've got little ASMR paper flapping of my dollar store pad here. And the first I have in my list is distractions, and I put in brackets YouTube. I imagine you're not unfamiliar with YouTube since you're listening to me right now, right? Right. So why did I put YouTube in brackets? Well, because algorithmically, YouTube is designed with certain purposes in mind. And there are many different styles of content creation out there, some of which are, in my opinion, very conducive, very helpful for artists, others that aren't. And depending on the type of content that you're looking at, algorithmically, if you have that autoplay feature on, which I generally have on myself, it can pull you down this rabbit hole from one topic to another for the sake of advertising, for the sake of exposing you to different things that you're interested in. For instance, if I'm researching camera equipment and lenses, that might also throw cameras, different types of cameras, and then camera comparisons, and then camera motion equipment, and then audio equipment, and then speakers, and then from speakers it goes to headphones, from headphones to amps to DACs, to DAC amps, to etc., etc. And you end up finding yourself down this rabbit hole of content that is generally focused towards kind of advertiser-friendly content, in a sense. Stuff that helps to sell products, which is understandable. YouTube depends on advertisers to make a living. From a person who's just consuming content, that's fun, it's interesting, it keeps you interested in different stuff and sends you back to Amazon to spend your hard-earned money on things. And an artistic perspective, this can be very damaging, because what happens is, if you're listening to certain types of content, it will pull you out. It'll force you to either A, pay attention, because it's designed to grab your attention, and B, to pull you away from your painting, to pull you away from what you're doing in order to seek other content, because the video only lasted about maybe 12 or 15 minutes. 12, 15-minute videos that don't cater to a headspace that you're trying to maintain to be creative is the number one reason I find that you can lose your flow. So what do I listen to? What kind of content do I listen to, and how do I curate it and manage it? Well, I generally, for the type of things that I like to paint, for the type of themes and contents and mood that I like to paint, I tend to prefer, most of the time, dialogue-based content with music to accompany it. So a really good example of this, which I'm sure if you know my work and you followed me for any length of time, are YouTubers like Vati, okay? Why is it? Number one, he has a very warm, elegant timbre to his voice. That's calming, it's meditative, it's not distracting. His voice doesn't pull me away from my work, it helps to suck me into it. Number two, his videos are very often lore-based, so there's words, there's content, there's themes that are very reflective of the kind of theme and mood that I'm trying to create. It's painting with words that which I'm painting with a paintbrush. And I find it complements the kind of headspace I like to be in 85 to 95% of the time when I'm painting. So I can listen to his stuff back to back to back to back to back. And I find that every now and then YouTube's algorithm will suggest another YouTuber who also does lore stuff. But they might not do it specifically like Vadi does, and they kind of get a little, the timbre of their voice changes, and the tempo of their voice changes, and the music changes, and it gets a little bit cheesy. It doesn't have that warm, melancholy vibe to it. And that pulls me away from my work. But it'll only happen maybe after around 2-3 hours of listening to him. And I'm well into my painting at that point. I just click back on the Vadi playlist. There's other YouTubers as well that I like that can or cannot, depending on the situation, complement what I'm painting. I always get his name. The abbreviated version of his name is Hiru Maridex. And he does a lot of World of Warcraft lore. I started playing Shadowlands recently, so I've been listening to his stuff. He too has a nice, relaxing timbre. I like the texture of his voice when he speaks. And it's calming, and it's lore-based. So I can just let it flow in the background, and it keeps me going, and I can just get lost in my work. What's important about him, or Lemino, Lemmino, there's another one that I like a lot. What's important is that they're long-running videos, they're calming, they are moody, but most specifically, the right kind of mood for the kind of stuff I like to paint. If I do listen to music, every now and then I do listen to music as well, particularly if I'm doing something for a client. But I don't listen to any kind of music. I curate playlists that match the tempo and the mood of what it is that I'm trying to paint. And a really good example of this would be when I was doing the Aron Dempfair card for the Game of Thrones card game. He's a man who lives on the sea. He's kind of like this ancient seaman who kind of is covered in barnacles and seaweed and stuff like that, and he lives on the ocean. And I wanted to get myself into this kind of this sea captain, ship captain, sailor type of mood. So I listened exclusively to the Master and Commander soundtrack, the movie with Russell Crowe in it. And that, with the yo-yo man, the cello, and the violin, and the songs that they sang, and the kind of ambient noises, and the cinematic things, it kept me in that mood, and I listened to that exclusively throughout my entire painting process, which lasted around 2 weeks. If I was to change what I was listening to, it was only after I stopped painting, when I was done for the day painting. An example of when I didn't do that, and really funny, was when I was doing the Dance of the Dead fan art piece, based off of the Ravenloft series of books. This one in particular, my favorite Ravenloft, one of my favorite authors of all time being Christie Golden, who incidentally ended up becoming one of the key writers for World of Warcraft as well. I didn't know that until much later on. When I saw her name pop up, I was like, oh, I used to read her when I was a kid. This is so cool. And in it, I started off, when I first started that painting, I was listening to kind of an older school, classical, kind of gothic fantasy music, which is very reflective of that particular type of stuff. Classical music, or a classical dark type of themed music that matched the energy of that particular painting and the time period of that art style. And everything was going well. And then I decided to start listening to Vati halfway through it. And he's very Dark Soulsy, and he's very dark, he's very melancholy, he's very somber. And my painting transformed halfway through it. And I can't stress enough the damage to your creative process, to your painting process, that changing moods halfway through can have. When you change the music, when you change the mood, it changes your vision. And all of a sudden, my more colorful, more traditional, old school fantasy art, Dungeons and Dragons type of art, started to become very dark, and my palette got very monochromatic and got very contrasty and got very smoggy and foggy. My design aesthetic changed. The entire color harmony of my piece started to change, but I had this theme with that mood, and it wasn't consistent, and I got completely derailed for an entire week. There's a week's worth of video recording of that painting process, because you can watch it on my YouTube, on my channel. that I ended up having to trash. I had to throw it out. And I think I might have mentioned it in an earlier talk. I reached out to my friend Tyler from Brush Sauce Theater, and I reached out to him and I said, could you just have a look at my painting and tell me what the hell I'm doing wrong with it? We do this sometimes behind the scenes, and he looked at it, and it was the funniest thing happened. After about half an hour, he sent me a little paint over back, and I laughed because it was almost a spitting image of the original painting. That he was gifted enough to recognize my original intention, and he brought me back to it. And I went, that's hilarious. And I showed him my original version and the version he showed me, and he laughed too because he saw that they were pretty much identical. And I realized at that point, go back to the original soundtrack and finish the painting that way. And I finished the painting, and I was very happy and proud with what I ended up with, but not for an entire week. So be very conscious of it. Now, bring that back to what you're listening to right now, listening to me having this art talk with you. I decided at a certain point the importance of being the kind of YouTuber, at least with these art talks, being the kind of YouTuber that I listen to when I'm painting. What fashioned these art talks that you're listening to right now, the music, the timbre of my voice, the fact that I removed my original, really, I loved it intro to my art talks, is all for the very purpose of creating the environment for you that I like to create for myself when I paint. The whole point of making these videos is so that you don't have to pay attention. The point of me making these videos is that you can just play it and forget it. It's sitting in the background. The music and the tempo and the timbre of my voice should match your painting. This is the reason why my videos are no longer 12 minutes long. My videos are seldom less than 20-25 minutes long, but they can run as long as an hour because I'm not watching the clock. Because you shouldn't be watching the clock either. I'm trying to create an environment for you to paint. Now, the next thing on my list is clutter versus non-clutter. The old expression, a cluttered desk means a cluttered mind. That might be accurate for an accountant. That might be accurate for a lawyer who's got a desk full of stuff, very complicated stuff that he has to manage in order not to screw something up that costs their client $50,000, right? They have to make sure everything is very meticulous and very organized. That is crucial for the success of what it is their job is. For an artist, that's not true. At least it might not be true for you. And my work environment has changed dramatically over the decades. I have changed, and my work environment has changed because my life and my circumstances have changed too. If I look back at when I was in my teens and 20s, my room was what a lot of people could interpret as being a complete chaos. I had posters up all over the walls and art all over the walls, and I had books everywhere, and I had my art strewn out all over my sketchbooks and everything. Confided I did work traditionally, so I always had my sketchbooks and my art and my pencils and crap all over the place, and it's basically the spitting image of my 20-year-old daughter Emily's room. It's guitars and amps and because she records a lot of audio and she sings and records music, and her ukulele and her banjo and her guitar and her her speakers and her amps and her drawing stuff and her posters and all the art that inspires her on the walls and her laptop. It's absolute chaos. But it's not. It's actually her creative nest. It's the space for her. It's a world that keeps her in her creative bubble. And she is creative 24 hours a day. She's creative in her sleep. She's creative when she's eating. She's creative when she's creating. It's absolutely crazy. If I walked into her room and told her to tidy everything up, that could have a very damaging impact on her creativity. And to me, a sterile, clean environment, particularly back then, was numbing to my creative process. It was very counterproductive to my creative process. Thankfully, I grew up with a mother who was an artist too, so she could understand that as well. So do be conscious of when and where you feel you're most creative, where you feel you're most comfortable to be creative. Do you like a noisy environment or do you like a quiet environment? A good example for me was I needed a noisy environment. I actually felt very creative and I produced a lot of great work going out to cafes, opening up a sketchbook, sitting in the corner in the dark and sketching people. I loved the buzz and the noise of a busy place. Noise helped to silence my mind. Silence to me was deafening. It was distracting. My mind was too busy and I would end up getting distracted with my own thoughts, where a noisy environment pulled me out of distracting thoughts and allowed me to focus. To this day, I can't go to sleep without listening to something. I can't go to sleep in the silence. My mind is too busy and it keeps me awake. But as soon as I put a little something on that I can focus on, something very similar to what I paint to, it distracts me and I'm out. Give me 5 minutes, I'm out like a candle. Now, how does that compare to who I am today? I still need my nest. I still need an environment that is a reflection of my creative self. So my studio / office / recording studio / art studio is full of shit. I've got art books and recording equipment and cameras and lights and fairy lights and microphones and lenses and headsets and speakers and, it's potted plants and stuff like that all over the place. It's a very, very, very immersive space, but it is extremely organized. Like, I know where everything is. I put everything in its place. My cables are managed and cleaned up. My headphone wires are all tied, always Velcroed together, and they're put in a nice case, and my headphones are nice and stacked, and everything's got a very precise place. Maybe that's a reflection of the fact that I'm a father of 3 and I'm always cleaning up. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that this is my space and I protect my space. I'm very protective of my creative environment. And my kids know. I mean, they hang out with me all the time, and Lucas might be sitting down playing Breath of the Wild 2 and he's behind me and he's jumping up and down and doing his stuff. But people respect where I put things, and nobody comes in and starts moving shit around in my office because I'm very, very meticulous about the way I organize things. And they respect my space. I respect them. We gel. You know what I'm saying? So it's organized, but it's immersive. If it got disorganized, I think I think it would have a very damaging impact on my productivity because I'm managing so many things. I run a school, I do YouTube videos, I've got camera equipment, I've got audio equipment, I've got artwork, I've got all kinds of stuff all over the place. So if I'm not very, very organized about it, this can throw off my day. So I have to be organized about it. And I know exactly where every single thumbtack goes. I'm like that now. But I wasn't like that 20 years ago. If I was like that 20 years ago, I would feel overly controlled and overly meticulous, and that would take away from my creative spirit. So remember that whatever it is that you do, whether you're somebody who likes a sterilely clean environment or a complete chaotic disaster tornado, that is for you to decide, but be very self-aware when it comes to that. The next thing can be very well described in 3 different artists online. 3 of my favorite artists out there: Anthony Jones, Marco Bucci, and Borodante. Because there's a quality that all 3 of those demonstrate and advocate for to greater or lesser degree in different ways that really that can really influence you in a very positive way artistically, and something you might not even realize that you do. But we do it as artists very often. This is something that I'm guilty of doing very often, but something that I've learned more and more over the years is something to be very conscious of, and something that I see very often with my students' work as well. And that is how much you complicate the subject of what it is that you're painting. This is a big one. I find that 9 times out of 10, when somebody feels overwhelmed with what it is that they're trying to create, it's because they're trying to manage too much. They've bit off more than they could chew. They're either trying to create a piece of artwork that contains too many separate elements that need to be managed, or their design process is overly complicated. if I take Anthony Jones, for instance, as a reference, this isn't only something that you can witness in his artwork, but it's also something that he teaches, advocates for. If you check out his Gumroad, he's got several Gumroads where he talks about this process as well. Anthony Jones is extremely well known and celebrated for his ability to achieve amazing things in ridiculously record speeds, albeit his speed has nothing to do with his efficiency. And I would add another artist to that, Bobby Chiu, because Bobby Chiu advocates for the same thing. In fact, to quote Bobby Chiu, he said in one of his art talk, I don't know if it was an art talk or a post or something like that, he said, speed has nothing to do with how fast your hands are moving. It has to do with how much thought you put into each brushstroke. I'm quoting him directly. In Anthony Jones's case, in one of his Gumroads, he talks about how you should know within the first 2 to 5 minutes if you're on the right track with a painting. If you're not confident you're on the right track with a painting within that period of time, it means that either A, you need to change something huge and fundamental about it, you need to make a drastic change to it, or B, you need to start over entirely. And you should be able to make that decision very, very early on in the phase. But then you think to yourself, Jesus, it takes me half an hour just to get anything down on paper. And that's the point. The fact that it's taking you half an hour just to get your idea down on paper is a good indication that you're overworking the idea. You're trying to manage too many things. And by keeping the content, the shape language, the composition, the theme simple, minimal, you are managing less things. And instead of putting all of that energy into the management of multiple different things, that's very difficult to do. Instead, you invest a lot of rich energy and focus into a very simple theme and a very simple design. Look at Anthony Jones's art, the fundamental structure of, pay attention to the first 10 minutes of his painting, and you're going to notice that he always starts with a very simple shape. But that simple shape is very thoughtful and based off of some very beautifully executed design principles. Look at Marco Bucci's work. You look at his work and you see elaborate colors and atmosphere and rich color notes everywhere. And well, look at his work. I'm not going to sit here and gush over it. But then pay attention to the structure, the composition, the geometric shapes that he's creating. You realize, wow, when you actually look at it, a lot of what he paints are very, very simple shapes and forms. The compositions are very simple, but very well executed. And when you look at that, when you see what they've painted, Bobby Chiu's another example, when you see what they've painted in the end, you realize that the beauty of their work is not in how elaborate and fancy and diverse it is. It's rather in how excellently they executed an otherwise simple design. Simple design, having a simple design allows you to invest a lot more energy, a lot more focus into the mastery of your execution of that design. But if you have 6,000 things you need to design, something's going to have to suffer as a result of it. The same thing applies to Borodante, but I'm going to add something to that because Borodante is also one of, he does so subtly, but I would argue that he's probably one of the most technically advanced artists on the platform that I know. And he does so in such a simplistic way. He's, after all, designed his own painting apps. This guy knows what he's talking about, okay? And in it, one of my favorite videos by him that really, it was a real light bulb moment for me, was a video he recorded years ago talking about how to work with layers, and I really recommend you check it out. He talks about how we work digitally in Photoshop can have a dramatic and immediate impact on how we execute our work creatively. How we overcomplicate layers or how we undermanage or overmanage layers in a way that messes up our flow artistically. If you have too many layers that aren't managed, or if you don't have a set structure to it, you spend all of that time trying to manage the layers, and every single time you have to take your eyes and your thoughts away from the creative process to manage it, you are derailing the process of creating something artistically. So what he says is, when you're doing lighting and texturing and blah, 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 I'll let you watch the video to see all the details of it. Do it this way. And then once you've achieved that, once you've reached that point where, okay, now I'm confident with the structure of how everything's placed, flatten it and turn your layers into this structure and work from that point forward. It's something so rudimentally simple, but it's so incredibly impactful on your creative flow. It's big. It's a big deal. Your creative process, how you focus, what you focus on, is as important as the creative thought process behind actually making your artwork in the first place. The technical and the creative have to work together, particularly since we are digital painters. We have to learn how to manage our medium, but not in a way that the medium controls us. We have to control it. And in order to do so, we have to keep that process as simple as possible. Another one, just to throw one under the pile, and I can plug an artist that I absolutely adore who just came out of hiding like a freaking bull at the gate, is Matt Core from Control Paint. If you're not familiar with Control Paint, he produced a video. He has probably the most organized, meticulous, professional, free resources on the internet for learning digital art. ControlPaint.com or CTRLPaint.com. I'll link it in the description below. It was already this ridiculously huge library of stuff, and I was just talking about him to a friend of mine. I had recommended him to a friend, and then out of nowhere, he video bombs YouTube with dozens and dozens. Within the period of a few weeks, it was, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 videos. It's ridiculous. He must have been working on it for years. And in one of his videos, just one of the ones that caught my eye, out of the ones that dozens of them that just kept flying at me, was the Photoshop panels that he doesn't use. Tell me that's not a brilliant topic for a video. All of the Photoshop panels that are useless to digital painters in most part. So he goes, this one, don't need it. This one, never use it. This one, don't need it. And the whole purpose behind it is to purge your workspace so that it's not cluttered with a bunch of crap you don't use. So the history panel, never use it. This panel, never use it. The blending options, don't need it because I have blending options down there. And he really walks you through all of these different things. And I'm sitting there going, why the hell didn't I think of doing a video like that in the first place? This is so crucially important. For me, I have my color picker, my Coolerist color picker. I have my layers on the right, and then on my left, sometimes I have my layers panel. Apart from that, not usually, because I'll just right click on my screen when I'm in my brush panel in there. So I just have layers and my color picker, and that's it. Maybe sometimes a channels layer if I've got like selection masks and stuff like that, but apart from that, that's pretty much it. So out of those four, Marco Bucci, Anthony Jones, Borodante, and Matt Core from Control Paint. Right there, I would highly recommend not only checking out their painting videos, but also check out their workflow videos, because they have these little gems, these little tips on how to manage how you work and what you work on to keep you from getting distracted from the complexity of your own workspace. Hugely beneficial. Now last, but certainly not least, in fact I would say the most important point on today's list, at least of today's list, because I'm sure there's more that I'll be able to tap on later on, but that's the issue of balance and health. And this is something that needs to be mentioned particularly today in the face of COVID, where we are being very justifiably and very accurately and very properly advised to stay home. Don't go out. Don't go to large parties and large congregations of people. Don't go shopping in malls with 6,000 different people. We've got freaking online shopping. You don't need to do that anymore. Don't leave unless it's for essential services. That kind of idea. That's incredibly important. And I have been house quarantining since COVID started. And I only leave for essential things. But that doesn't mean sitting in your room in the dark for 9 hours straight in the dark and not get any kind of exercise or movement. I cannot stress enough how if I didn't, I would be 1/15th the professional I was today, because my professionalism is as dependent on my technical and artistic skill as it is on my physical and emotional health. And if you look around at all of these, look around at artists around, all these professional artists you see on the platform, I could pretty much say it the same for all of them. But Just to name a few that I can think off the top of my head, like Ahmed Aldoori and Marco Bucci and Tyler Edlin and Antonio Stappaerts and Cynics, Ethan Becker, Borodante. The list goes on for every single one of them. Trent Kaniuga. Every single one of them has the commonality in the sense that they're all active, mentally and physically active on their health. If they have emotional issues, they speak with counselors and psychologists, and they actively pursue treatment for different physical or emotional things that they might be struggling with. Ross Tran, a good example. Have you seen the guy's arms? When I saw him, the first time I saw him, it was a picture of him and his mom, and he's wearing a sleeveless shirt. I'm looked at him going, look at the pythons on that guy. That guy's got huge arms. He works out. And for me, I make I put as much, if not more, energy into my physical health and my nutritional health and my mental health as I do on my training my art. And that allows me to not have to put ridiculous hours into my artistic growth and get more growth than I would if I was sitting on my ass for 9 hours doing nothing but drawing. It allows me to be more focused and more efficient with what I execute artistically. And when I'm not doing that, I'm making a point of getting up, of exploring different things creatively. So I'm not just painting all the time. I'm also researching psychology and music and audio equipment and camera equipment and survivalism and all these different fun topics that keep my mind stimulated and not in a linear focus all the time. I do resistance training with resistance bands at home. I haven't gone to the gym, even though I have a gym 5 minutes away. I don't go to the gym because of COVID. So I just got resistance bands, and I do a lot of studying on fitness training. Eugene Teo and Athlean X, nutritional education like Eric Berg, for instance, who I love, I listen to all the time. And in turn, that also feeds my art. You can ask my students how many times I quote Jeff Cavalier from Athlean X when I'm teaching anatomy, because I've learned a lot about anatomy through him, the functionality of the human body. And we very often go off on tangents talking about health and anatomy during anatomy class. They all play in the same game. It's all the study of you and me, of us. So make a very strong point of tailoring your work environment ergonomically and tailoring your work attitude in terms of getting up, taking a break, getting fresh air, sunlight, eating healthy, being psychologically healthy if you're dealing with any emotional struggles, to address them, to talk to people who you can trust, who are professional about it, that aren't dramatic about it, that can help you to find coping mechanisms and perhaps medication if necessary in order to manage certain issues, either health, mentally or physically, so that you can be in your best shape. Just like focusing on your workspace to create a non-cluttered, not overly complicated workspace and creative and technical execution of your artwork to make your life, the process simpler, to be able to focus and execute better mastery of what it is you're doing. The same thing applies to the tool that you're using to manage all of that shit, your mind and your body. All right? And with that said, I appreciate you sticking it out this long. And of course, I love you all with all my heart. And happy painting. Take care.